You've had a very long experience in the industry for longer than I know and have been around in the industry. So what I'm going to try to do today is capture some of that experience, including your time at the AES and the time that you were wandering around through the industry and seeing more of it than any of us in the industry or outside of it have ever seen, I suspect. But if we go back to the beginning, what was your environment like when you were growing up before you joined the audio industry and that became part of your life?
I'm a country boy. I went to Kangaroo Flat Primary School, just on the road going towards Maryborough, Victoria. My dad was a soldier and he was stationed there in Bendigo. So I was brought up in a government primary school. We moved closer into Bendigo and lived in Hargrave Street, and I went to Gravel Hill Primary School. Then the dad got moved to Ballarat, and I went to another primary school there called Urquhart Street State School, and then it was time to move on to secondary school. So I started my secondary school at Sebastopol Tech in Ballarat, which was a co-ed technical school, year 7. We then were sent down to Melbourne, and we lived right across the road in a street called Hannah Street, where they built Northland Shopping Centre. And around the corner was Preston East Technical College, first co-ed, one of the first co-ed tech schools in Victoria. So I went on until year 10. I'd had enough. Year 10. So I was offered a job. They were at that time coming around the schools offering jobs, looking for candidates for apprenticeships. So I ended up doing an apprenticeship as an electrical fitter, armature winder, stroke electrical mechanic at HK Collars in Union Street, Northcote. Collar was a Austrian chap, bit of a wild man, but he put on apprentices and trained us. So we did a 5-year apprenticeship whereby I went to Collingwood TAFE to do my apprenticeship studies, which in those days was 1 week at a time in the month.
What were those school years like?
Oh, pretty good, pretty tough, really tough going to Preston East Technical College. There was a lot of dramas in that college, but it was probably a good way to get out of it. I enjoyed my education much better when we went to Collingwood Tech, because it was a little more flexible, more easy go, and I was learning something that I wanted to learn, as opposed to be pushed down a line where I didn't want to learn. I wasn't really that interested in doing some of the more cultural studies of literature and all that. That wasn't my game. But one thing at Preston Tech was that we did have good trade subjects. So it was a good machine shop there, good woodwork shop, and good plumbing and whatever. So I did learn the basic skills at that college. My father wasn't a tradesman, he was a soldier. So he wasn't really, really handy with tools, where I learnt at that college, trade school, to use tools and enjoy using tools. I love using my hands to make things and do things.
You talked about your boss as a good mentor at the time you were growing up and learning your trade. Did you have any other mentors at the time? Perhaps teachers at the college?
Yeah, one guy used to wander around with a dust coat on, with a strap underneath his dust coat. I don't know whether he was a mentor, but if he mucked up in the workshop, he got a whacking. Those were the days, weren't they, Rod?
Indeed.
At work, the guy was called Hans Koller. He was an Austrian guy, married to a German woman, small business in Union Street. He had a pretty good following. Had a lot of mates who were good drinkers, and he loved putting on a party every so often. So we used to have regular parties at the workshop. There was another guy there called an old guy there. It was more of our teacher. I'm just trying to think of his name. I'll come to me in a minute. But he was our sort of supervisor and looking after us at that stage. There was about 5 apprentices there, which was pretty good for the small business.
Indeed, and it was a good grounding too. 5 years at that time would have been very thorough.
Yeah. At one stage, we nearly burnt the whole place down. One Saturday morning, we were accused of playing football in the workshop, and it was a cold day, and we had one of those salamander oil heaters in the workshop. And because we always varnished the motors and put them in this big bake oven, motors, transformers, armatures, this big bake oven, the floor was obviously got a layer of varnish over the years, and this heater got tipped over by accident, and because the oil went all over the floor and caught on fire until it burnt the whole building down. So that was a bit of fun. When we told the Northcote Fire Brigade that there was a 44-gallon drum of thinners up the back, thinners we used to clean the parts to the motors, they just foamed the place like Father Christmas had been, So that was a bit of a fun Saturday morning, but the boss drove down the street and again to this day he accused us of playing football, but the oven door fell on top. The oven door was lying on the side of the oven, and the guy dragging out the motors on with a crane, with a pull crane, he ran into the door, and the door flipped over and hit the heater, and the heater then hit the floor, and then the rest was history. Yeah, no, the teachers were very good. It was a good grounding. We learned all sorts of. We also did caught up on our Year 12 subjects, so we had to catch up on that.
So you actually finished your primary education and secondary education completely, and were well on the way to a tertiary beginning. Did you go much further than the TAFE?
I did some electronics, industrial electronics, motor control electronics at Swinburne in Hawthorne. Oh, yeah. And then I started on after I haven't come, on the January the 26th, 1972, I was to report to Puckapunyal Army Base for call-up of national service, which was the compulsory national service that the government had brought in for recruiting for Vietnam.
I remember that. My call-up was in October 1968.
Yeah, well, I got called up 71, and I still had 1 year of apprenticeship to do. So I got deferred for 71, but they didn't forget about me. They still got me. So I did my army service, all up in Queensland, ready to go to Vietnam. And as you know, the government changed in 72 to Gough Whitlam, and that pulled us out of Vietnam. So we were able to walk at that stage on the 7th of December, 1972, walk straight out the gate if you wanted to. My dad, being a soldier, advised me to stay in. You'll get some more benefits. So I stayed in until the July of 73. So I did my full 18 months of training of national service. I didn't go to Vietnam, but we were just on the door about to jump on the plane to be sent. So fortunately, we didn't go. So I was in the Royal Australian Engineers. I was a sapper, SAPPER, and an electrical mechanic.
Okay, and your army training, did that help your career progression?
Helped me develop myself as a person. I was a young guy at 21, 20. So when I came out of the army, I'd grown up and learned a bit of the real-time world out there. So it was good for me.
And the army training was good for you?
Yeah, it was all right. It was pretty full on, I can tell you that. I mean, they were teaching us to go over to kill people.
Yeah, I remember my signals training, and that was pretty thorough as well.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go into SIGs or Arami, but at that stage I couldn't get in, so they offered me Royal Australian Engineers, so I took that.
That was
otherwise I would have been a foot soldier.
Yeah.
So in the army we did a lot of electrical jobs, but we also learned how to delouse mines and add mines and booby traps and blow up things with dynamite and plastic explosive, and it's really interesting. It's good fun pushing the plunger.
It would be.
It was great. It was a great time. So the army taught me discipline. The last few days of my army period was at Watsonia Barracks.
Remember it well.
And you were there with the SIGs, so you know what I mean.
Yep.
And I was the world best person at the time, and I got handcuffed to a guy who was being court-martialed. So they had the full court-martial set up with all the guys on the bench, and I was handcuffed to this guy who was a cook at Puckapunyal, and he had got drunk on duty and was being charged and was possibly going to go to Holsworthy up in New South Wales for about a 4 or 5 year stint. Fortunately, he had this wonderful captain who was a legal guy in the army. He got him off with a 4 weeks of pay or something like that. It was just great to sit in the court and listen to that whole proceedings go down, and how the captain introduced his whole family, his wife and the kids crying, and God knows what. The guy was totally overloaded in the job he was doing, so he got off.
There were some good things in the army. I remember them well. You know, it was a good training ground for all of us.
Yeah, up in Townsville, we were up there for quite a while. Pretty warm up there, and we had no work to do, so he sent me and another guy, Graham, from New South Wales, tall, skinny guy, and we used to help out the public works up there. We used to go and do work over the public works. And so in Townsville, we would go off to Magnetic Island when they had the big cyclone had gone through there in the 70s, 72. And we went over there and we rebuilt all the electrical sort of installations over there. So that was our day out. We'd get on the ferry and go across to Magnetic Island, and that was good. You weren't that bored, you know.
Yeah, it's a good career development. What did you do when you came out of the army? Stay with electronics?
Went back to my original employer, HK Collars in Northcote, and because they had to take you back as part of the law. They had to take you back into employment. But by then I'd grown up. I'd become a man then. I wasn't going to put up with this rubbish. So, and the guy still treated me like an apprentice. So it was time to move on. So I moved on down to Hawthorn, and I worked for a company called Delaney Electrics in just near the Hawthorn Glenferrie Oval, and was there for a while. And I said, no, this is not for me. I'm going to develop myself. I'm going to move on. I want to do something else. So I decided to apply for a few jobs. In the meantime, I was going to school doing a marketing certificate at Swinburne in Hawthorn. So that was part of my development when I came out of the army. I went to applied for 3 jobs: Simpson Pope, Phillips. I'm trying to think of a photocopying mob. So I'll expand my knowledge. And because I was always interested in audio, always interested to get involved in that, I took the Phillips job, which was the factory in Huntingdale Road in Clayton. Now, when I joined there, I was a sales engineer. There were 500 people employed in that place. And by the time we all left, there was no people employed. They closed the whole place down. They were making precision monitors for the television stations. They were making 100 to 200 watt power amplifiers for PA. They were manufacturing that and a few other things. We also sold a number of Dutch products, which were imported, like pocket paging, M100 intercom systems, FUMU background music systems, all sorts of, and lots of large speakers and 100-volt line systems. So that's how I learned about the 100-volt line system, from that experience, and how to fit up and design up a PA system for a big factory. I did some really big places. So that was...
You would be looking after broadcasting equipment across the board, not just audio, but television and entertainment generally.
It didn't get much involved with the TV side. There was some other broadcast engineers there doing that. That was the precision monitors, the monitors you see on the desks of the guys monitoring the signals that are coming in and out of the places. They were making those monitors there. They're making them for the world.
Yeah.
So, that's where they were made. Around the corner was a big Philips complex, Astor Records, and I got to befriend Harry Majors around here, who was the chief engineer, and I got to see many times to go around and chat to him and watch all the records being pressed on the big record machine presses. And around there was Chrysler, they were manufacturing refrigeration systems, washing machines, and buried in that was Astor Records.
I remember going to Astor Records and watching records being pressed in the early days of my teaching. So I remember that place quite well. And it was a fascinating experience, as I recall.
Yeah, so that's really pushed my thoughts around working more in the audio industry. So from the days of Philips, which we all were asked to leave, retrenched. But Philips were good. They left us with our company cars for a while until we all found jobs. And I went off to work for a guy called John Tung in Blackburn, and he used to do my installation work. He was in the company called All Tune in Salisbury Avenue in Blackburn. Anyway, it was a small outlet, and I was doing all the sales and whatever. So he used to do my installation work, preferred installation installer when I was at Philips. So he ended up employing me.
Ah, and where did you go from there?
RH Cunningham.
Wonderful, big audio company.
Yeah, and Cunningham's were importers of Sennheiser. So I got to learn a lot about microphones and do a lot of trips to Sennheiser factory in Germany, Millbank, Panjud cable ties, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? Horn speakers. It was a range of horn speakers.
Caltech Lansing, JBL.
No. UK based. They did. No, different one. They did the big soccer ground there in London. I went to it. I'll come to me in a minute. A big horn, big long throw horn speakers. You'd see at the races. Remember those types of big horn speakers? You'd see at the races on a pole. Anyway, that was the football ground in London there, where they do the FA Cup. Is it the FA Cup?
Wembley Stadium.
Yeah, Wembley. I went through Wembley Stadium, looked at all the audio there. Went to a number of shows in UK to look at staging and radio mics and all that with Sennheiser, just to get an idea of what else was going on in the world. So I was able to go to, by that stage, I joined the AES, but there was Brian Horman, Doug Richards. Do you remember these guys?
Yes, I remember them.
Yeah, he used to run the meetings down in Clarendon Street. The Clarion was set up in just under the King Street Bridge there, just around that area. So I ended up going as a committee member and because that expanded my interest in audio. I was always interested in professional audio as opposed to domestic audio.
I remember a tannoy demonstration there early in my career.
Yeah, but I should go back a few years when we lived in Bendigo. My dad bought a stereogram, and in that stereogram was a reel-to-reel recorder, a reel-to-reel flatbed recorder, 1/4 inch, 5-inch reel. That's when I started to play with tape.
Mm.
I still love reel-to-reel machines. I reckon they're fantastic. I reckon they're just brilliant. And they're alive. They're alive, as opposed to this digital stuff which sort of disappears that way, doesn't it? So I got to play, and I was always recording some stuff for the television. And those days the TVs didn't have an audio outlet like a little headphone socket out that you could run a cable straight in. But I used to try and wait till everyone was not in the house and put a microphone up against a loudspeaker and do it that way. And, crazy on TV themes and just little quirky pieces of music that I fancied, So a whole bunch of these reel-to-reel, 5-inch reel-to-reels. And then one day I had the money to buy myself a reel-to-reel myself. So I bought this Panasonic reel-to-reel 7-inch reels. This was big time, big time. And for some reason, I decided I was going to do some repairs on it. And I lifted the whole chassis out, lifted it up, and forgot I'd still had it plugged into the power point, didn't I?
Ooh, ouch.
And I grabbed around the fuse holder where the 240 volts was, and still got a scar on my finger. Next time I see, I'll show you where I blew a hole through my finger, and the machine went one way and I went the other way. So that taught me safety. And what do
For
I
an
do?
electrician, I would have thought that you already had that experience.
Yeah, I should have known better, shouldn't I?
Indeed.
Yeah, I've been a smart ass, and so I decided to thought I could fix this thing without unplugging it from the power point. So I made lots of recordings on that machine. It was great.
Yeah.
Living next door to me was a ex radio tech, and he then helped me build my first stereo amplifier. Remember the PA amps were in those metal boxes with a sort of open frame, the old Philips amps and that PA 100-volt line system. So we built that from a circuit from a HMV stereogram, which was sort of pretty popular those days, to we built me up an amplifier, which was, I think, around about 20 watts a channel or something like that, but 8 ohms. Also, that same man had a decoder, reel-to-reel machine, 4-channel, 4-fail. Decoder, is it? Yeah.
Decoder, D-O-C.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, he used to get me up there and play me this magnificent music. It was just stunning. And from then on, it was imprinted that I was going to get one of these machines or work in this industry. So I went back a bit then, Rodney. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'll come back again or jump around a bit, I think. I'll come back to your involvement in the AES, because it sounds as though you were very early in the original.
Very early in the early days, yes.
But you went from Cunningham's where to?
TIAC.
And that's where I really encountered you, and you set me up.
And I was offered to set up the professional division at TIAC, which was really Tascam, the Tascam brand, under the banner of TIAC. But it was not being properly pushed. As you mentioned the other night in the meeting, that Ben Douglas window was full of Tascams and all that, but there was nobody pushing this to customers like yourself, the broadcast industry, the educational industry, the recording industry, the television industry, and anyone that small studios right up to very large studios. There was no one doing it. They had a guy there called Travis Faulkner, but he was doing more the music side, So I was put on as the national sales manager or the national manager of the pro products.
I'm glad you came along, because it was at a time when I was building the RMIT studio, and you largely built that studio equipment for us with the Tascam desk, Tascam 8-track recorder, and a Tascam DAT, as I recall.
Yeah, it was an M700 desk, wasn't it?
It was 16:8, so probably.
Oh, it was the one with the leathery sort of armrest. Yeah, that was before the M700. Yeah, we sold a few of those desks. Yeah.
And well, the benefit that you got from it was that I put about 600 students through on that desk. And I believe a lot of them went on to like Tascam products and actually use them. And I know you also sold a 24 to 16 track desk to the Advanced College for the journalism course. And I taught on that for a while too, and it was a very nice piece of equipment. And I think a 16-track recorder went with it.
Yeah, the 16-track 1-inch were very, very popular, and particularly when FM was introduced into Australia, where many of the AM stations moved across to FM, and they had to redo their production studios to do all their promos and ads and whatever. So we sold, I think, around about 30 or 40 machines, close all up the East Coast. So they were good stuff. But one day, a little Vietnamese guy came into Whiteman Street, where we had the office, with $24,000 in cash. He lived out Footscray Way, and he wanted a 16-track 1-inch with all the goods, with all the bells and whistles, the remote, the lot, everything, noise reduction, everything. And he pays me out in these $100 bills, you see. And I had to say to him, where the hell do you get this sort of money from? You know, but he wouldn't tell me, of course. But he walked away with his 24-track to set up in a little studio somewhere out in the western suburbs to do obviously some Vietnamese music. And there was quite a lot of Vietnamese people living out that way at that time. I did some big jobs with that Tascam equipment, Rodney. We did some great jobs, and
it was good gear.
Travel around the world. It was fair priced. It worked. We always had the backing of all the tape manufacturers, like Ampex and BASF, and they would give us free tapes to give out to the customers, which was, when you think about it, if somebody got a free reel of BASF or Ampex, they'd probably end up using it, wouldn't they? But after the 16-track, we bought in a 24-track, 2-inch. We didn't sell too many of those. There was a lot of them already out there. Atari was probably the mainstay there. Atari and Studer. The Studer machines were just, wonderful. And if you went to practically every studio you walked into, there was a Studer.
We're about halfway through the interview at the moment, and you've explained why you're interested in audio. You've talked about your qualifications and your involvement in TIAC. Where did you go from there?
The TIAC, I worked for TIAC as a subcontractor for a while and set up the commercial division. And we had this, wasn't really much involved in Tascam. Tascam at that stage was, when I left, we're doing about $5 million in Australia, which doesn't sound much, but it was really good profit and good turnover, where the TIAC company themselves were doing $200 million. So we were was only 2 of us, or 3 of us at one stage. We were sort of pushed in the background. And eventually the boss said, look, you're not doing that sort of turnover. You can go and you can leave, or you can set up a commercial division. So I set up the commercial division, and it was selling more to similar customers, but not a lot of Tascam. We at that stage we were offered the Sennheiser agency, but the people at TIAC couldn't see that there was big money there, and good money and good technology for them to do. But the Germans were a little reluctant to hand over their technology to a Japanese type company. Mm-hmm. So they were a little worried there. That was probably the final decision made, that they weren't prepared to hand over their technology. Because many times every year I would go with Cunningham's, I would go to the Sennheiser factory and see all the latest. And that was exciting. That was really good. And the conferences. These are the days going back to RH Cunningham anyway.
Yeah.
With TIAC, after that I did this commercial division. I was working for myself, and I lived basically on commission. And Gavin, the MD, probably hated that, because at some stage he used to pay me in the order of $22,000 to $23,000 worth of commission every month, which is pretty good money.
Indeed. So that gave you a good exposure to business and running a business and the.
Yeah. Well, I was running my own business and whatever.
Where did you go from there?
The end of my business.
Yeah.
After I left, after TIAC, I went and set up my own company called Graham Haynes and Associates Private Limited, and I imported products from Denmark, UK, Doro from US, Denmark, DK Audio, a couple of other things, UK, Graph, high-speed copiers, cassette copiers. And I did that for a while until the exchange rate and the GST sort of really made it difficult. It was very, very difficult to set up without a lot of cash flow. You need your cash flow for those tough times, for the times where it's not as fluent as whatever. And I was working from home in Wanturna. But I put a lot of DK audio in OV trucks, Channel 7s, lots of Doro in at Foxtel, a lot of graph machines into all sorts of language labs and people duplicating for ads and God knows what. So, these machines were $3,000 or $4,000 each or some damn thing, some of them. Went to the factories in all these places. Very nice. DK Audio, I used to go to their show in Broadcast Asia, which apparently is on at this time in Singapore. Used to do that every year. That was a bit of fun. Work on the stand and talk to the Australian customers that came around. Got a lot of experience out of all these exhibitions. In the meantime, I still was going and funding this myself to AES overseas exhibitions. So I was able to go to Barcelona, London, Paris, Vienna, New York. Where did I go? One more Scandinavian one. So I was lucky enough to get around and work or visit and see all of this pro audio equipment emerging from manufacturers that were really top quality stuff. Whether you could sell it in Australia and the finance was there for it was another story. But
you got to see a lot of the world and a lot of audio. Where did you go from there?
Graham decided to go back to his trade. So I went back to working as an electrical mechanic. And for 4.5 years, I worked on the smart meter project for United Energy and Tenix. So I was running around as an electrical mechanic installing smart meters to people's premises, which they didn't really want, but we did them. And I was a subcontractor, so I had my own vehicle, all my own tools and test equipment, and that's what I did every day. And earned quite a lot of money out of it too. It was wealthy. It was a pretty good money earner. So from then I decided that I ran into someone who was a teacher at a TAFE. I said, I wouldn't mind doing some teaching, I hated teachers when I went to school, Rodney. I couldn't stand them.
So did I.
Never think I'd end up being a teacher, or an instructor. So I did a couple of years at Federation in Chadstone, which is a TAFE college there in their Chadstone Shopping Centre. That's where I had done my training for the metering project. So I was teaching telecom over there. So I went over to Chisholm then. And for Chisholm was a different days,
What did you learn about yourself and about your skill set by teaching?
Well, as you know, I had to do a certificate 4 in training and assessment. You couldn't get the job or keep the job without that. So that was a 12 months course, which I did at Chisholm. So that was a good understanding of how to control and run a class and get through a whole day with things for students to do and make sure that they got their proper assessments and God knows what. So I did that in 2020, I think 2020, yeah. And I did, as I said, I did that at Chisholm, Dandenong. And even Chisholm Dandenong paid for it. We used to do it one day a week on a Friday, and they ended up paying for it. So it was really good on their time. It was wonderful. So I did all of the subjects pertaining to Cert 4 training and assessment. You can get a Cert 4 without doing all those subjects, but I've got a whole lot of them. So that was fun. So that opened me up to getting work elsewhere. So then after Chisholm, I went back and did a bit of private work again, a bit of audio-visual sort of work and buggerising around and doing this and that. And then one of the guys from Chisholm was over at Frontier over in Glenroy, and he said, "There's a job over here for you if you want to come over here to Frontier." So over a year and a half ago, I went over to Frontier, and I've been training electricians over there. Anyway, so there was a job vacancy at Melbourne Polytech. So I'm over there now for a little while, till the next adventure.
You've had a wonderful experience that covers from electrician to tradesman, journeyman, to marketing, sales, business, running your own business, teaching. You have covered the entire gamut of experience that is relevant for this industry. In that time, you've seen a lot of places. You've talked about the overseas visits you've had and the companies that you've seen there. What did you see of the Australian recording industry? Or audio industry generally, not just recording.
Yeah, well, as you know, I went to most every recording studio in Australia I could get to see, and obviously there to sell some more product in, but even down to DAT players and CD players, professional rack mounting equipment. So I saw most of the major studios, most of the broadcast stations, most of the television stations. They all had audio outlets, and all someone was doing some sort of audio work. RMIT and the La Trobe University and all the unis all had small studios doing video production and audio production. So I did all that sort of work. I felt the Australian industry was pretty healthy. It was good, but where these guys got their training, and you can back that up, was virtually in-house. They were taught in-house. Some young guy turned up. As I go back a couple of years, I nearly ditched my apprenticeship to go and work at 3KZ for the morning. The guy put all the ads together in the morning for the morning breakfast show. And I nearly ditched my apprenticeship halfway through, but my dad talked me out of it and said, "Look, stay with it." But maybe I could have been at this stage a real guru in the radio industry. Who knows? That didn't happen. But so all your broadcast stations, and all your FMers all had pretty nice production setups, and they were doing some great work. I mentioned Neil McRae. Well, he was one of the board members of Eon FM, which is now Triple M these days, and that's how Neil was there. That was set up in South Melbourne. Around where I worked in South Melbourne, there was a lot of recording industry, film industry, and broadcast stations to go to. So it's pretty easy to travel around. And I thought that I was always well accepted and trustworthy, and I wasn't the type of salesperson that went in there to rip anyone off. I was there to tell the truth and match my product against any other product that was available.
You certainly helped me. You certainly helped me at in the time when I was setting up my studio.
I can't remember it all, Rodney.
I remember one occasion when you brought Toshi Doi into the studio to have a look at the facility.
Mr. Doi. Yeah,
that was a fascinating experience that I will never forget. And I didn't speak Japanese, he didn't speak English, but we spoke electronics. And we spent time going over the circuits of the desk, talking about why he'd used particular ICs and what their performance was, and how that matched into the audio theory. And it was a fascinating afternoon. Thank you for doing that.
Also, I was lucky enough to come across a number of composers. The guy that wrote all the music to Snowy River, the guy that wrote all the music to the Titanic, James Horner. He came out to the film and television school, and I ended up having small luncheon with a few characters, about 5 of us, with James Horner, who wrote all that beautiful music, and I have a huge collection of his music. And a year or so ago, he died in a single aircraft accident. He was a pilot, single engine aircraft, and crashed in Santa Barbara. So he was a lovely little guy. He was piano taught, classical piano taught, but that was through the film and television school here in Melbourne. I don't even know whether they still run the film and TV school. It was down in South Melbourne. So I made a lot of contacts through that. and we would help out with a number of equipment when the time came. If they needed some equipment, you always sort of help out the people in your industry, you know. And lots of rock and roll groups, you know, like the Little River Band, Skyhooks, and Slim Dusty's daughter. We're all using a lot of equipment, not necessarily Tascam, but we'll go back to Sennheiser here, microphones. Skyhooks wanted a Porter Studio Tascam to do some rehearsing at home, and so you meet up with those sort of people in various studios, put 45 Tascam machines, 2 trackers into ABC Hobart.
You have an overview of the industry, and you said that most people were self-taught. How many people needed training, formal training, would you say?
Can I just talk quickly about myself? I virtually trained myself too, you know. And the people we employed were sort of semi-trained. You did it by you trained yourself. You did it by being pushed, you know. We need to achieve these targets. But you enjoyed it. I enjoyed what I was doing. I loved it. I really love selling audio equipment. The people, the industry, the travel I got to do, I just loved it. I really do miss it, actually. That's why I'm probably still part of the AES.
The business, the experience that you had, you said you had a certificate in marketing. You learned a lot by, again, hands-on teaching yourself about business?
Yeah. I used to go to night school at Swinburne in Hawthorne, do that at night school, did that certificate out of work time.
Yeah.
So it was a long day. I was married, a couple of kids. It was a long day. So it was, you had to be there. Those were the days.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's probably helped me with my teaching. So, and then your school, and then there was the 2 private schools opened up at that time. I was still selling Tascam. You know, we deal with them. Oh, Collards was really called something else. What were they called?
College of the Arts.
College of the Arts. That's right. Yeah. And we did a number of surveillance jobs. You know, we remember one time we did go out to the forensic labs. Remember, we did do it.
Yes, the AES did that.
Yeah. Well, I used to go out there regularly and deal with those guys, because they were transposing all sorts of audio recordings to all sorts of evidence. And a couple of times I'd been asked to come and stand up in court and verify a tape or whatever, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. To be cross-examined by the defence counsel, you know. So we didn't get involved in that, all that sort of stuff. Vic Police had a couple of people set up to talk with the federal police, and then the federal cops would then talk to the ASIO. And when I used to go to Gumbra, I would go to those 2 places and, you know, get let in and speak with those technical people that did that type of work. But Vic Police were pretty up there because after the bombing of Russell Street, they tended to upgrade their systems and all that. And there was a sergeant there, a woman sergeant. She was pretty knowledgeable. Can't think of her name now. But I used to deal with them regularly. That was interesting business, you know. And, you know, and also recording tapes that had been damaged and whatever. So you got involved in some of that type of work, heating tapes up in ovens and God knows what. As you know, Ampex had a bunch of bad tape there at one stage. You know, it was sticky and gluey and gooey.
I've got some.
Lock up a whole transporter would, you know.
I've got some.
Blame our machine. We've got some, yeah. Well, yeah.
Let's get to the end. I want to talk about the involvement in AES itself and your early involvement in that. Can you tell me something about your early days, when you began, and conventions and things of that sort?
Well, let's go back to when I first joined. It was Brian Horman. Brian Horman was running. He was the chairman, and Doug Richards and people like that were all coming to the meetings. Some of those people on our list that was in the meeting the other day, like there was a number of those people would turn up to the meetings, Clive O'Brien and all those characters, you know. And so I was just a committee member. I was just interested. And then we came around to do the first convention at the Hilton Hotel in Melbourne. I think I ended up running the workshops. That's right. I was the person on the committee along with Rod. I think Rod or Michael's surname. So I was running the workshops. So I'd run all the technical workshops, make sure they were all set up and programmed, had all the equipment there for them. And we did that at the Hilton was the first one. Did you come to that?
Yes, I did.
And we moved over to the World Trade Center. And again, I got the job of running the workshops. And a lot of those workshops were on multi-channel infrared for deaf people. Where Syntec were involved. Syntec at that stage had the Sennheiser agency then. Michael was the treasurer, and I used to assist Michael. Michael Falk, Falk. Michael just lived down in Ashburton, and eventually he moved. When he died, Rod Brown took it over, the financial side, and then when Rod wanted to get out, I took over the financial side, and I've been the treasurer since. Nobody's complained. Nobody complaining.
Nobody will.
And the money that was collected at that time was due to 3 good successful conventions in Melbourne. But where we lost the money was the Sydney conventions. It was just expensive to go up to Darling Harbour and do all that. And it was just far too out of our regular daily day state. So we'd try and get the membership payment here in Australia as to allow for the exchange rate from Aussie to American dollar, and try and sort of make a little bit of money at each membership, which was really only about $5 or $10, and that was really used just to sort of run the section, you know. But most of the time, the section was running on the money that we'd made. The conventions turned out to be a good little money maker, not by chance, but we got a number of companies involved in doing their exhibitions, but then eventually that fell off as the business got tighter and tighter in Australia.
So the conventions. The conventions were early on in the Melbourne section. Do you have any recollection of the starting of the Melbourne section when it started?
1974, I think.
Okay. And Brian Horman, you said, was the chairman.
Brian Horman and Doug and all that. I think Doug Richards was the section president at that time, and then Brian took it over, and Brian used to run them in his office in Clarion. But we'd all have to sit in Brian's office, and he had the desk higher than everyone else, so he was elevated looking down all of us. One time I travelled on the plane with Brian to US, to Los Angeles convention. We presented our stuff at the section meetings, and I put up a report. And that was good times. And Tascam was fortunately in Los Angeles, so that's where their head office was, so it was handy for me too.
And the AES Melbourne section was well received.
Yeah, well, we did. And then I went off to the New York office and had a look around there. It was only a small office up in, I can't even think what street it was, 59th Street or something, I don't know. There was an English guy in charge there, I was trying to think of his name. But he was always there to deal with. There was a lady in the office that looked after the memberships and all that. So I'm still amazed how the AES has survived over the years. It's obviously fairly strong in the US, very strong. I think it dropped off a bit in Europe, but there used to have to be a US convention and a European convention every 2 years. I think they used to alternate it, and then any of the sections, such as we did in Melbourne, they'd come down under and came to Japan. I went to the one in Japan. That was good too. So I got around a bit with the AES.
We're nearly finished, but you were about to talk about your time at Philips and some of the interesting things you had there.
As I mentioned, I worked with an engineer called Neil McRae. He was like the audio video engineer there down at Philips in Honeydale. And in a couple of big jobs we did, when you drive over the Westgate Bridge, you see those big cables that are strung between the pylons. Right, there had to be a talkback system made up to be able to let the workers talk from the top of the pylon down to the base of the bridge. So we designed up a nice little talkback system for that. So I got involved in all that. That was a bit of fun, just using a simple 100 volt PA amplifier and driving some horn speakers. So that was one nice little job. The other big job was we also did the Maya bowl. We had got involved in that, putting sound in Maya bowl and rejigging that when it was the early days of when it was first installed. So there was a refurbish of the Maya bowl and the sound system there. And the other job was the Royal Ballroom at Exhibition Buildings, is it? Exhibition Buildings, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we put a big sound system in there. There was a lot of dead balls that used to go on in there, a lot of meetings. Put a big rack of amplifiers in. And believe it or not, we used a lot of outdoor horn speakers for that job. Because it was very noisy, very bouncing all over the place. It was not easy to put audio in. So we put big horn speakers in there, along with some bass speakers, of course, and the whole rack of 100 volt line amps and whatever. So there were some jobs I did with Neil and a few others too, but they're the ones to mention. And getting back to Tascam days, recording studios down in Elstonwick, what was the name? Anyway, a composer called Jerry Goldsmith used to come regularly to Melbourne. You may know Jerry Goldsmith's music.
I do.
Air Force One and all that sort of stuff, and all that Star Trek stuff and all that. So he used to come to that studio and record quite a lot, and we'd asked to bring in some extra gear. So that was just meet a different lot of people in the industry. So Alan Eaton Studios, that's it. And Alan Eaton used to play his big band at the dance on the lake there. Every occasionally I'd go to a dance there. Alan Eaton big band. And he made a few recordings. He used to sell his discs at the band night at the dance. Did you ever go to any of those dances?
No, I didn't, but I have been to Alan Eaton Studios.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the engineer that was there. Anyway, he used to use a little bit of Tascam, not a lot, because they had MCI equipment. It was better than Tascam equipment, they told me.
Yeah, so look, you've had
all questions now.
You've had a wonderful experience across the breadth of the industry that is second to none. I don't know anyone who has had your depth of experience or breadth of experience. In your time, what sort of things have you learnt that you can pass on to newbies entering the industry for the first time? What are the things that you would tell someone starting from nothing and trying to enter the industry?
Let the customer tell you what he wants. Let the customer talk. Don't interrupt the customer. Let him have his say. Let him tell you what he wants, and then you put your 2 cents in. Let the customer tell you his problem, and then you try and resolve it with whatever you have, whatever facilities you have. Help the customer, back your product up, most certainly. Provide service for your product. But then, don't give your product away either. You don't have to undersell your product. I always sold really good quality products, the Sennheiser and Tascam and other brands, DK Audio. They're beautifully made products. And they did the job, And I would never put my name or be involved with something that was trash. I just couldn't do it. So have your integrity and, not selling.
What sort of skills would you advise that person to aspire to?
Oh, you have to do some sort of selling course. I should imagine you'd have to do some engineering course. You've got to know what you're talking about. Because some customers go out the way to trick you up and see whether you know this. But I think you need to be a good seller fella. And one of the ones I met was Doug Richardson was a good seller fella. He was always able. I'd meet him around the traps and every summer. He was always doing well, and he was always telling me how much he'd sold and how much. But Graham mentioned a chap the other night at the meeting. That's running at Cedar. Is it Cedar or? He used to work for Brash's or Allen's. He mentioned his name. Frank Hinton. Anyway, I wish to deal with him on the musical side of PIAC, Tascam, or Tascam mainly. And Frank was a good seller fella. He's still doing that sort of business. Just meet people that just know how to react with people and work with people, and give something, but get something back. What you want is your equipment going into their premises and your equipment working well in their premises, and back it up with service. But if you find yourself working for someone who's not backing up their product, you got to ask yourself, if you don't back up your product, they're not going to last in business. So I tried a couple of times, Rodney, working for smaller companies, and they just didn't have the resources to maintain what they were doing. It was always catch up. And so try and work for a medium-sized company or.
Knowing where you came from and the experiences that you've had over a long career, would you have done anything differently?
I'd love to have been and did my apprenticeship as a TV technician as opposed to an electrical fitter. I didn't have enough marks at school to get to be a TV technician. Ideally wanted to repair equipment and get in there and put my probes across resistors and capacitors and God knows what, but I never went down that track. I was on the sales side. So I missed out an opportunity there, and I should have stayed at school and got that qualification to get into that business. I think I would have been a lot more successful. And as far as the companies I've worked for some very good companies who looked after me, paid me well, and I looked after their product and sold quite a bit of their product for them. And I was happy with that achievement, very happy. I don't know how I came across for you as a salesman when I first came to see you.
But wonderful. I appreciated your help.
I was confident and I knew what I was talking about. And if I didn't know what I was talking about, I found out. But I always made sure I had good backup, good technical people behind me to back it up.
The world has changed a lot since you started. I vaguely recall you talking about valves and valve amplifiers at the start of your career, and now we're talking about digital wristwatches that have more power in them than some of these early technologies and more capability. Have you seen that change, and what do you think that change has done for the industry?
I think it's been wonderful for the industry. I think it's just advancement plus, and the technology that I tell the students that they're going to see is just going to blow their minds away. We ain't seen nothing yet, as they say, you know, and you yourself know that the technology's progressed that fast, but some of the old stuff still works pretty well, though, doesn't it? Still
Yes,
nice
it
to
does.
play with. I mean, I've got some in my little studio here. I've got some old gear, some old microphones, some audio equipment. All works well. Sounds all right to me. So, it's not all about technology always. It's the user, the operator has a lot to do with how it works and what they get out of that piece of equipment. I remember Colin Stevenson used to sit at Channel 9 there. Was one massive big Altec Lansing speaker blowing his ears out when he did IMT, you know. Then you meet the guy over at Russ Thompson over at Channel 10, the people you meet, and you watch how they work and how they talk to you. And one night at Channel 10, Barry Crocker was going to sing, and I took out some Sennheiser Proffy powers. We called them Poppy powers eventually, Poppy powers. And Russ was not happy when he heard them on air, that they were popping too much. And Barry Crocker had a big voice, you know. And we ended up, before the show, when the show was going to air live that night, we ended up cutting up foam windsocks and putting them inside the cage of the microphone to cut down the popping problem. But Sennheiser lost a bit of credibility on that microphone because Russ Thompson would never use them on air again, you know, because of that problem. But you try to tell Sennheiser that was a problem there. And the same microphone, Anne Kirkpatrick from Slim Dusty's daughter, she used to put so much saliva into the microphone she'd short out the capsule, and it'd lose all its bass response. And Lou Richards, Channel 7, with the headset mic combination, he had a terrible voice anyway, but he'd also, for the Channel 7 football commentary, he'd short out the capsule on the boom mic, you know. So we had to put biggest windsocks on. But you tell the Germans or tell the manufacturers, well, no, it's not happening in our country, but it was happening here. So we, in Australia, were, you know, a good testing ground for people's equipment. Very good. We extended its life and put it to its usage, you know. They said it'd do that. Let's see if it does, you know. And the Aston Leyland brothers, they used to go out with a whole bunch of Tascam gear in their studio there and put all their programs together and put them to air on whatever channel was on. They had a whole bunch of, I met the Leyland brothers, they had a whole bunch of Tascam gear and recorders and God knows what. And Bruce, wrote the music for Snowy River. He had a whole bunch of, he had a big console like you had at RMIT, had one of those at home in his home studio, had 24 tracks. They all our gear, you know. We had our haters and we had our lovers, but we had more lovers than haters, you know.
Yeah.
And then people would come and talk to us at the exhibitions and tell us, yeah, I got one of those, mate. They're fantastic, you know. And the Ampex recorders were all Tascams anyway, all the two trackers. They were all made by Tascam with an Ampex badge on them, but they're all Tascam machines. You pulled them down, it was all Tascam parts inside them. And I think whether they changed their heads or not, I don't know. But a lot of snobbery, Rodney, a lot of snobbery in the industry. You know, you've got to use the right gear because the musicians will walk into a studio and they didn't have this or didn't have that or didn't have that. They weren't recording that studio. So it was a little bit of what gear have you got, you know? What loudspeakers, monitoring system, what mixing desks you got, you know that, you know.
Yeah.
And if you stuck to one brand, one type of brand, it could have got you into trouble. So the recording studios used to buy a mixture of stuff, as you know.
It's probably a consequence of so many people teaching themselves and starting from the musician rather than from the technical side and understanding the technology that they were working with. So there's probably an education argument in there, but I don't want to take it that far.
Well, how do you reckon I might have ended up if I had to work for 3KZ doing the morning recordings, getting all the ads ready on cartridges, and God knows what. You think I might have ended up an operator? But ended up being the manager of the station. Who knows? That's how you learned.
Yeah.
That's how you. There was no going off to school. You'd go off and do an electronics course. It was Brian Perry. It used to run 3KZ. Do you remember meet him? Chief
No, I didn't.
engineer.
I didn't.
Lovely guy, fair. Our age bracket at this stage. Easy to get along with. Wasn't up himself. And then you met Jeff Tomes. He was a different scale. Jeffy was a good fella, but he'd tell you if he didn't like it, like it or like your product, he'd tell you straight up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he worked at Channel 9 there quite a while. And then you had your favourite, Sony did well because Sony could do a whole package. Cameras, desk, recorders, time code recorders, time code, center track, time code machines. Sony could walk into a place and do the whole lot. So you're really tough against that. I don't know whether they still do that, but they were probably my main competitor, Sony and Atari. But it's the way you sold in and the budget they had. But again, I say there was a bit of snobbery. Yeah, if you got the latest desk and the latest SSL and the latest Studer machines. But Sennheiser are set up in Australia by themselves now. I don't know how well they're doing these days. I don't know whether I've still got some. I still run some Sennheiser radio mics myself. I've got two sets, handhelds and pocket. It's good product, I love selling good product.
That's obvious. I've asked all of my questions. Do you have anything else that you would like to say at this stage?
I don't know
We have plenty of time.
What this interview will do for anyone, and whether you do put it up on the AES website. I don't know whether it's of assistance to anyone, but the thing is to keep trying. I had a goal, and I wanted to work in the audio industry, and I eventually got there. It took me a couple of years to get there. So I moved out of my trade into the audio industry. Then I went back to my trade, and guess what I'm doing now? I'm still back in my trade. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm teaching my trade. I don't teach audio visual.
But you've had that wonderful experience, and should you choose to, you could teach that.
How I did, Rodney, I had a portable tape recorder, a portable lovely little AIWA or a little UA, and I used to go out and record things and record sound effects and trains. And I used to go to all the air shows. I've got some superb recordings of vintage aircraft, I've got to tell you. And one day I borrowed a stereo Naga off Gray and Ivy over at Monash, and I took that to the air show, and I recorded on this beautiful Naga, the engineering magnificence, magic, as I was recording on reel-to-reel in the back of the boot of my car, over the other side of the airfield, so I couldn't get all the PA getting mixed into it, and I loved it. I just love it. And I still do it occasionally. If there's a big thunderstorm here, you know what I do? I get out my little Tascam and I record the thunderstorm. And I put it to music, and I put background music to it. And these aircraft, I should give you a copy. All the aircraft I recorded, I put all music to it, and it all comes up really well. It sounds fantastic.
I've done that too. I've played with Nagra. I played with Ferrograph.
Yeah, there's a new Tascam recorder out. It's an 8-channel one, about $800 or $900, and it goes out full out to even if you record distortion, it cleans it up for you. If you read about, I can't think of the model, but it's I've got to buy. When I get some extra money, I'm going to buy one like you with your new toy you dragged out the other night. What's the future? I keep telling the students that are learning to be electrical mechanics. I said, listen, guys, you got to do some telecom. You got to diversify. If you're going to be pulling cables through a house and just doing new houses, you're going to get really, really bored with that. The guys that are doing industrial electrical work get a variety from motors to switchboards to this to that. The poor guy that's stuck with a boss, all he does is wire new homes, mate. That's going to drive you insane. You've got to provide variety in your life so that you go home, you've done something different every day, a different job. You've wired up something hanging off the side of a 10-story building, which I did one time, and I forgot to tell you this one. I had to go to Sydney, and the Sydney Tower was being built. And I was with my Sennheiser demo gear, and the Sydney Tower hasn't been completed, had it? It was up there, but the big circle thing around with all the gold windows on wasn't completed. They took me up in the crane lift up the side of the building. I was absolutely petrified, Rodney. I got to tell you, petrified. I stood in the lift like this with my head down and my box of demo gear. And the whole idea was for me to go up there and demonstrate some multi-channel wireless systems, radio mic system for different languages. When I got to the top, the half of the windows hadn't been completed, was still open. And the wind's all blowing through it. And before I even got on the lift, I had to sign an AMP insurance policy to get up there. So I was so glad to get back to terra firma that day. But they didn't go with the gear because we didn't have the variety of frequencies, the amount of channels that we could use these days, But they wanted to set up these stations around the one part of one of the floors there where you could walk up and get a translation in a different language, whatever. And they wanted to do it all with wireless radio mic system.
Thank you very much for putting up with me today, and thank you too for giving me an understanding of the breadth and depth of your experience and your involvement in the industry. And thank you for giving me your time so generously to help me put this together for the Audio Engineering Society.